technology guru to put this together tonight. Thank you so much, sir. And thanks everyone for joining. It's obviously unusual times, and who would have guessed a year ago that we'd be getting together from our, well, my mother-in-law's attic with a, yes, that is a bathtub behind me, which I will not be taking a bath during this presentation, just to be clear. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. We of course would love to be at Orvis and in the warm confines of the fishing stuff around us, and then maybe for a drink afterwards. But it is what it is, and we intend to keep the chapter doing good work and keep everyone engaged over the next few months. And Jesse's been working hard to plan some virtual meetings, so these will become something we do on a monthly basis going forward until we're able to get back together safely with everyone. So. Tonight we have a special guest, Matt Sanderson from DC. He's going to be reviewing some of the results from an electrofishing survey back in the fall of 2020. And I wanted to just take a few minutes before we turn it over to him to provide a bit of context on the habitat project we did, which I think I see the names on the list. Most people are, if not aware of. We're active participants in helping put that together. And so I just wanted to share that with those of you who may not have been actively involved in the chapter or not in the chapter. So it kind of frames the data that Matt's going to provide. And I also want to say, I will in a formal introduction, it's really hard to overstate the partnership that Matt and the DC's provided, the chapter and the local fisheries. Matt's been an unbelievable partner throughout the years, both in making the project a reality and providing the type of information that he's going to be talking about tonight. So we're indebted and full of gratitude for Matt tonight coming in to share the data and for the work that he's done for the fishery over the many years he's been involved in it. So, but just before we turn it over to him, and we're not going to get into the business of the chapter, we're just kind of diving into the things here. Back in 2019, we put together, the chapter and the community put together a project at Oatka Creek to install what are called root wads. And if you can see this map here, this is what is known as the cow bridge or farmer bridge that's kind of on the halfway through the park. And this is Union Street over on this side. And this is the parking lot that you might have gone to if you've been to the park, the fishing access parking lot. And these were the installations throughout a total of 83. The reason we did that is we had met with Matt and DC as well as US Fish and Wildlife and determined that section of the park, which covers about a half a mile, was what was known as habitat limited, which means that the fish population numbers were limited to a reduced amount of habitat in that area. And the idea of these root wad installations was to provide structure to reduce the vulnerability of fish being eaten, essentially predation, reduce predation. And there are a variety of factors, but mergansers are primary predator that we were concerned about. So this is what a root wad installation looks like. If you haven't been out there, it's essentially the roots of a tree sticking out from the bank after being shoved in with some heavy equipment. And that provides an area of cover. It also tends to trap stuff floating down to provide more cover. And those 83 installations were intended to provide trout a place to go when they were under attack. The other thing that we did as part of this project is to baseline the fish populations in this section and in the section outside of the project area. So we had an understanding of roughly how many fish were in that area prior to the installations and then kind of track it over time. And so the work that Matt and his team did this fall was really our first look at the fish populations post-project. So I'm sure Matt will obviously knows a bazillion times more than I do about this, but we'll frame it. But it's certainly a first early indicator of some work. And in addition to this, the DC and Matt's team had done habitat improvements on Spring Creek as well. And so he has data from Spring Creek, and he's been sharing that over the last couple of years. So I just wanted to frame that this isn't directly the project, but it's an important aspect of measuring the outcomes related to the project work that was done by the chapter. So with that, I know many of you are familiar with Matt Sanderson. He is the senior aquatic biologist for the New York State DEC in Region 8 out of Avon. Been doing it for a bunch of years. Smart, nice guy, dedicated to the fishery, helpful to the chapter. Thanks so much, Matt, for coming. Really appreciate it. And I'll stop talking as much as I like to talk and let someone that knows what they're talking about talk.
Okay, thanks, Cal. Let me see if I can get this going.
Now, just while Matt's bringing up his presentation, let me make a comment and just say that if you have any questions during Matt's presentation, feel free to type those into the chat box, and I'll try to feed those to Matt during the presentation. And then when Matt's all done, we'll allow people to come off of mute and ask questions individually after the presentation. But if you have a question during the presentation, just please put it in the chat box and I'll either feed it to them during the presentation or afterwards. So.
Okay, thanks. I'm still kind of working on trying to figure out how to make this come up. I got to do share screen, right?
Yep, share screen and then make sure you click the audio option for the video stuff. Yep.
Okay. All right, I gotta try this again. Something's up here. Okay. All right, share screen. Yeah. And then I click share down at the bottom here. Okay, does everybody see that?
Yeah, we see your PowerPoint, but not in presentation mode. We're seeing like the regular one.
Okay, how about that?
There you go. Perfect.
All right. Okay, so everybody can see that. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We're good.
Oh, okay, great. Well, Cal, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Normally when I've given this presentation, I've titled it Summary of Fishery Surveys of Spring and Oatka Creek. But since you started off with the Oatka thing, well, I switched it all around. So I'll talk about Oatka first, and then we'll go on to Spring Creek. Okay. Back from 1998 to 2003, we had done a study or a number of surveys and monitoring on Oatka Creek that was part of our evaluation of our implementation of the no-kill fishing regulation within the Oatka Creek portion of Oatka Creek Park portion of Oatka Creek. And in doing that, we established a couple of control sites, C1 and C2, which you see here are at Bowerman Road and all the way down here, Twin Bridges Road. And then we had 5 survey stations within the reach that we were going to make no kill. And essentially we had done annual surveys in September from 1998 to 2003. The no-kill regulation went into effect in October of 2000. So we had 3 years before and 3 years after. And we wrote a report on that. So, but I wanted to give you a little background of where some of these stations were. And you may recall that in the winters of 2013 and 2014, and also 2014 and 2015 were fairly harsh winters. And what had happened was a lot of the local large bodies of water that normally don't freeze over, froze over. And there's a fish-eating bird called the common merganser, which they searched out anywhere where there was open water, which they could feed, and they found spring and Oatka creeks. And a lot of mergansers were observed on both Oatka and Spring creeks during those winters, probably feeding on trout. And then we got a lot of complaints from fishermen that fishing was pretty poor. So The first step in trying to evaluate what's going on here was obviously to go out and have a look. And we did that in 2016. And here's a comparison of 4 of those 5 stations. 2003 was the last of 6 years of those surveys. I just kind of put that up there for comparison. But in 2003, over the course of all of these 4 of these 5 stations, we collected a total of 805 trout of various ages and sizes at each station. And in this case, station 1 is Union Street, from what you saw on the map up here, station 1. And we pretty much showed overall in that whole stretch, trout numbers had indeed declined between 2003 and 2016. And this is pretty much the same information. We actually started taking a brief look in November of 2015. This is just at Union Street. And we had done that in 15, 16, and then 19, and then of course this year. And one thing you can see is that our number of adult trout, adult brown trout, and to a certain extent the number of young of year brown trout. And this is normalized per 100 feet. The number per 100 feet. And in each one of these cases, we surveyed about 400 feet of stream, but you can see that their numbers are steadily going up from 2015 to 2020. So there is a certain amount of natural recovery going on at the Union Street station of Oatka Creek. And we just picked that one to survey annually instead of all 4 or 5 of them. Just, it's something that as time allows us to do. And here's an overall picture of Union Street showing what we found, the number of brown trout caught per 100 feet from 98 to 2003. You can see there was quite a bit of variability among years as to the number of adult and young of year brown trout that we caught at that station. And even with the reduced numbers in 2015, we found more trout there than we did in 1998, but certainly not average for most years. And now that we're getting to 2020, we are starting to approach numbers that we saw like in 2002 and 2000. So we are getting some natural recovery of the trout population there. One thing that I will point out that is a little confounding with these numbers is all of our surveys from 1998 to 2003 took place in late September. And just due to other workload constraints and time, in 2015, 2016, and 2019, we were only able to do these surveys in November. And in 2020, we did do it in September to be a little bit more comparable with the earlier years. So you can take these numbers a little bit with a grain of salt because there can be differences in trout abundance in certain parts of the stream between November and September. Lots of times they're off spawning in some of the tributaries in November, whereas they might be in the main stem of the stream in September. But at any rate, it is showing that we are getting some recovery of the trout in that area in Union Street. Okay, and as Cal mentioned, and I can go on a little bit further, but yeah, we constructed this aquatic Aquatic Habitat Improvement Project in 2019. And I would have to clarify something different than what Cal told you. I'm sure he was just being modest. But the Seth Green chapter of Trout Unlimited was quite a driving force in this project. Your fundraising efforts and your volunteers coming to work on the project on a daily basis. The chapter put a lot of time and effort into this. So you deserve a lion's share of the praise for this. So don't be so modest next time, Cal. But you can see it down along the bottom there. This was quite a partnership amongst Monroe County Parks Department, DEC, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Trout Unlimited. And that's what made the project go so well. It's because we had these people all working together. And some of these pictures show what was actually constructed. If you can't visualize from what Cal showed with the excavator holding their root wad and driving it in, this is a diagram that kind of schematically shows what we have there. But we constructed these, and the idea was, to create hiding places for trout and other fish so they can escape predation by fish-eating birds and mammals. Now, certainly the cold winters of 2013 and to 2015 brought mergansers to this area in unusual numbers because they couldn't feed anywhere else. This was the only open water in the area. Over the years, there are other predators that have come along just because of their numbers are increasing for good things. One example is bald eagles, ospreys, mink, things like that. Numbers of those predators are increasing in the area. So the idea is to help out the trout, give them a place to hide so they can escape predation. So we did this project. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to evaluate the success of these projects. And as you can see, we have seen some modest improvements in the number of adult and young of year brown trout that we see in this area. And these are the raw numbers here. And what we're doing is we're kind of comparing this with the Union Street site, which is immediately adjacent downstream from where the project site is. The project site isn't quite approaching the same numbers as Union Street is, but we are seeing some improvements. I think a better way to look at it is visually here. You can see in November of 2019, there were quite a few more adult and young of year brown trout in the Union Street site as there were in the project site. But you can also see, looking at the September 2020 data, that we saw more adult brown trout in 2020 as opposed to what we saw in 2019. Again, keep in mind, we're comparing September with November. But I think from what we saw and the numbers of trout that we captured there and their sizes, we certainly think things are improving there. The numbers of trout are improving there. And nearly all the trout that we caught there, we pulled out from out of these root wads here. You can see in this picture here, this is where we're actively going under these root wads and pulling trout out from underneath. I have to give photo credit to Don Rowe. Don Rowe came, and he came both to Oatka Creek and Spring Creek and took a lot of pictures and some video. I thought I'd have some video here to show you, but I ended up deciding it wouldn't translate very good here. So if you're interested in seeing the video, perhaps Don would be able to share it with you. Yeah, that's That's what I have for Oatka Creek. Should I pause here between the two creeks and maybe take questions for Oatka Creek?
Well, there's a couple of questions, Matt, that are typed in here that I can feed you. So one from John was wondering if there's any data on the number of mergansers in the streams from year to year. Is there any data on that?
Not on Oatka Creek. I attempted to quantify the number of mergansers over at Spring Creek. But let's see, we did that in the winter of 2016, which wasn't as cold, and we didn't see many mergansers at all. The best handle that we have on the number of mergansers come from just observations of the staff at the Caledonia Fish Hatchery over on Spring Creek. Most of them were just awed by the number of mergansers that they saw on the creek, on the hatchery project, on the hatchery property in the winter of 2013-14 and winter of 14-15. 13-14 being the more dramatic one. You know, we had guys there who'd been working at the hatchery for 30 years and had never seen that many birds. But as a general rule, we don't survey to quantify the number of mergansers anywhere, and not particularly not here.
Okay. Another question from Lisa is about if you could share your thoughts on how water temperatures might have contributed to the decrease in trout population, and if there's any thoughts on putting a water temperature gauge on the creek.
I had temperature gauges in Oatka Creek at Union Street in 98 and 99, I think. Basically what they were is what they're called hobo temperature loggers. They're basically these little electronic devices, waterproof electronic devices that you set. You start it off, you set, and you put it in the stream and you leave it. And then you pick it up at the end of the year and download data from it. It continuously records temperature at the interval that you preset. It was just a special study that I had done just because I was curious, but it's not something that we routinely do here. Usually the U.S. Geological Survey is the one who maintains stream flow and temperature gauges. They maintain the flow gauge at Garbett, Union Street. I don't think they have any plans to put a temperature logging in there. So I really don't have any actual on-site temperature data. Although we do know that 2016 for the most part was a little warmer and drier than other years. It's something that we saw that affected trout numbers more on Spring Creek than what we saw at Oatka Creek.
Okay. Another question from Peter is he's just wondering when the next survey is and how long the populations are expected to take to be able to recover.
Well, I'll show you the Spring Creek stuff to show you what we showed over there. But these can continue annually until we see some good recovery here and some use of these things. So I plan on continuing to do this.
Okay, well, I would move on, and then there will be some other questions, I'm sure, and then we can funnel those in at the end.
Okay. Okay. Just for some background at Spring Creek, I've already mentioned a lot of this, but there were some severe winters. They were called polar vortices or vortex. And they were really cold and some large area water bodies froze over. And in normal winters, most of these water bodies don't freeze over, but this is where those water bodies that were common mergansers are normally feeding on fish. And when they froze over, they searched around for whatever unfrozen water they could find. And Wellspring Creek pretty much stays a constant 50 degrees year round. That's why Seth Green located the Caledonia fish hatchery there, the first one in North America, and it never freezes. So the birds congregated there and apparently developed a taste for trout. And we even got reports from people seeing a large number of dead frozen mergansers on some of these water bodies. They were just attempting to feed there, and those were the ones that didn't quite make it to go someplace else. But yeah, these mergansers were noticed on Spring Creek, particularly on the hatchery and adjacent properties. Like I said, their numbers were in the hundreds. The guys at the hatchery said they'd never seen so many before in all the years they'd been working there. And that was followed up by complaints of poor trout fishing in springs of 14 and 15. So we began fishery surveys on Spring Creek on the Caledonia hatchery property beginning in November of 2014, and we continued these annually until 2020. We established a couple of stations on the hatchery property. You're probably familiar with the common names of some of these areas. You've got the 900 section, which is 900 feet below the train trestle here on Caledonia hatchery property. And then we have what's called the veteran section, which is just below the hatchery outfall. It's called that because at one time that was open only to disabled veterans. And then there's the public fishing area that is upstream of the hatchery intake in this area here. So we established two stations, one in the veteran section and one in what we call the upstream section where the public fishing is. We also conducted surveys of the veteran section in 1995 and 2001. And as much as we tried to stay uniform in our station lengths, it did vary a little bit from year to year, depending on where we started and stopped, based on more or less on water and habitat conditions. But in the later years, we got pretty consistent in surveying a 380-foot area. We stopped short in 2016 because once we got above the hatchery outfall, because that was kind of a drought year, there really wasn't any flow above the hatchery outfall because not a lot of water was flowing over the upper dam at the hatchery. But we tried to stay consistent with our lengths as best as we could. And the same with the upstream area. In later years, we started doing a little bit longer of a station. But we are able to normalize our data by expressing the number of trout that we caught as the number per 100 feet. So yeah, certainly for surveying 200 feet versus 300 feet, presumably you'd catch more trout in 300 feet. That's why you normalize it to say number per 100 feet. And this is kind of a busy table here. There's a lot of numbers on here, but basically this is just a summary of what we found each year from 2014 to 2020 in both the veteran section and the upstream section. Probably the big number is the number per 100 feet. And you can see we gradually rose in our number per 100 feet over the years. So we are seeing some recovery of the stream from 2014 on. And in particularly, we're seeing that in the upstream section. And again, I think the better, and one thing again that I'll point out in the previous slide is, yeah, these are all in November. Again, these were done in November with the exception of 2020, which we did in September. And we also wanted to be able to compare the numbers of trout that we caught from 2014 to 2020 with what we caught prior to the predation event. And we surveyed in 1995 and 2001 in September. We did September 2020 this year as opposed to November, again, to try and get more comparable numbers. And as you can see, we are kind of approaching in the number of brown trout per 100 feet, and certainly the number of adult brown trout per 100 feet is approaching what we saw in 95 and 2001. So I think we're getting some good recovery of the trout population. I will mention that in February of 2016, we installed again some escape cover habitat structures in there. Those we put some down trees in there and we made some artificial structures in there. It's kind of hard to say whether those structures have anything to do with it because we have not seen intense merganser predation or the same number of mergansers on the stream in recent years as we saw in those 2 cold winters. And again, here's how things are looking between 95 and 2001. And 2020. Keep in mind, these are Septembers. The other years are Novembers, which could come into play in trying to compare. But we're definitely seeing our number per 100 feet approaching that. The interesting thing is if you look at another way to look at this is in terms of what we call standing crop or biomass, and that is the pounds of trout per acre. And certainly you can see that adult trout biomass in September of 2020 is very closely getting very close to the numbers that we saw in 95 and 2001. So that's a pretty good sign that a stream like Spring Creek can recover almost all on its own, although I'm sure some of the habitat structures that we put in there are helping a lot because we pulled a lot of trout out of those habitat structures that we built.
Matt, there's a contextual question here from Jeff, and he says some numbers are improving, but the brown trout per 100 is not. Which actually dropped off. He asked for elaboration on that. I think he was referring to maybe several slides ago.
I'm sorry.
That go back one slide. So this one, see how the brown trout for 100, 590, 514, 350. I think that's what he was looking at and kind of wondering about.
Yeah, and those numbers are reflected here as well. Yeah, that's not the same as what's here, is it? I'll have to check my spreadsheet. But yeah, that should be more 540, right? Yeah, I must have a glitch in my spreadsheet somewhere. I'll have to look at that. But the biomass data I just did today, and I'm sure that's right. So probably the thing to look at is biomass. Yeah, I'll have to check this slide out here, see what's going on with that. Thanks for pointing that out. Let me write that down. Okay, but at any rate, the numbers are approaching what they were in 95 and 2001. See, something's up with that slide. This shows the portion of different size trout, and you can see that it's varied. The adult numbers have varied over the years, but again, you can see the portion of adult trout, of the portion of the catch in the veteran section of adult trout is actually more than what it was as a portion of the catch in 95 and 2001. So the numbers or the proportions of different size trouts or different age groups of trout have kind of remained consistent over the years, with the exception of 2014, which in 2015, which are the first years that we surveyed after the event, the predation event. You can see there's lots of young of year numbers and smaller numbers of adult trout. Those presumably were the 2 years after, 1 and 2 years after the predation event, where mergansers were targeting trout that were generally between 6 and 8 inches. And particularly you can see it in the upstream section as well. 2016, we only caught large adult trout because that was the drought year. There wasn't a whole lot of dissolved oxygen in the water in 2016 because it was warmer and drier. They actually had to aerate the water as it went into the hatchery because DO was pretty low. But as you can see, the numbers in the upstream section have been on a steady increase since 2014. Again, probably because there's been more normal flow conditions and a lesser amount of predation from mergansers because our winters have been more normal as of late. And you can see a dramatic increase in the biomass in pounds per acres in the slide here in the upstream section. We took a look at brook trout too. Brook trout numbers between 95 and 2001. More recently, they're substantially lower than what we saw back then. In the veteran section, we didn't have comparable numbers in the upstream section, but we've seen kind of a steady increase in the number of brook trout that we caught in the upstream section of Spring Creek. So these are the initial conclusions that we derived about the trout abundance due to merganser predation. It's likely the main cause of why there was poor fishing, and it kind of continued through 2018 or so. Like I showed on that one graph, mostly due to size selective predation. The mergansers were selectively preying on 5 to 8 inch and 8 to 12 inch fish. They would select the bigger fish over the smaller fish, but then the smaller fish were able to grow once merganser predation had declined. And even though the overall trout population declined, the survival of eggs and fry was pretty good in compensating for the decline. It also suggests that few adults can produce an adequate number of offspring as a compensatory mechanism to maintain the trout population after these perturbations. We had similar size group portions among the surveys. our recent winters were not as cold as those 2 winters. And the hatchery staff didn't see as many mergansers there over those winters as what they saw in 2013 to 15. And like I said, 2016 was a drought year. That accounted for a lot of the decline in 2016. But precipitation and flows were well above average in 2017 and pretty much average from 2018 to 2020. So the idea is in the absence of merganser predation, low flow, and low dissolved oxygen conditions, trout survival is high and the trout abundance is increasing. Improved survival due to the addition of that cover habitat may have played a role, but since there wasn't a lot of merganser activity during those post-construction winters, we can't say for sure it was habitat or just because the mergansers weren't there, but I'm sure the habitat didn't hurt, can only help. Nearly all this, especially in the upstream section, we pulled a lot of big trout out of the artificial structures that we put in there. But the idea is since Spring Creek is very productive stream, and you don't really see too many 600 pounds per acre streams around New York State, since it's a very productive stream, there's a very good chance that that wild trout population will continue to recover. And that's consistent with observations in other productive trout waters. And it also leads to that, again, in absence of merganser predation and low flows, Oatka Creek ought to continue to recover too, because it's pretty productive. We've documented up to 150 to 200 pounds per acre in Oatka Creek and spots. So that's what I have. I'd be glad to answer any other questions you might have there.
So one more, a written question, or maybe a couple more, from Dan. He was wondering about any water quality measurements that have been done on the creek to understand if any of what has happened might be attributed to other factors other than the mergansers.
Well, the hatchery monitors temperature and dissolved oxygen in the creek above the hatchery, but mostly as part of hatchery operation. They want to know if there's a decrease in dissolved oxygen, and there always is. There's what we call a diurnal pulse twice a day. The dissolved oxygen can change because the pH changes between night and day. But they keep an eye on that. Other than that, I'm not aware of any other water quality measurements going on either of these streams. That's generally usually something that our Division of Water does. They don't do it routinely. They do it mostly in response to known and reported pollution problems in streams. But as a general every day or every year thing, no, we don't do much water quality testing in the stream.
Okay, well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change a setting and allow people to come off of mute. So I would say if you have a question, come off of mute and ask your question, and then otherwise just stay on mute. So I'm going to change that setting right now. Okay, so if you want to ask your question, feel free to come off of mute and ask away.
Hey, Matt, this is Cal. Just a quick question with regards to the data from the project site. Is there any conclusions that can be drawn at this point, or how many years typically do you have to run those types of electrofishing surveys to come to a conclusion?
Well, 2 years doesn't show us too much, as you can see, but in Spring Creek, we've been doing this for about 6 years now. So I And then we did 6 years worth between 98 and 2003. And that one we did 3 years prior and 3 years after a regulation change. But yeah, I'd give it a few more years to keep an eye on it. It's something that, once we get started on a project, something like this, we put it in the QUEC for next September when we do our field planning.
Great, thanks.
So I guess we'll keep doing this until we see some good positive results or no change at all. And then, well, we'll go back to the drawing board and see what else we might be able to do to help things along.
This is Don. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I did take a number of videos. I know that you would choose not to use it, much more complicated to use in a presentation like that. But I think perhaps Trout Unlimited through its website could make those videos available to those who might want to view them. Is that possible, Cal or Jesse?
Yeah, yes. The answer is, yeah, we could post them on like Seth Green's website or on our website and or on Facebook. We could definitely do that.
Yeah, I think it adds something, and not a criticism here, but by people, some have not ever seen any of those things going on. And to see them actually in motion is probably going to help secure their interest in the project.
Yeah, Don, I gave it a try. I put it in a slide and it was rather choppy, and
Yeah,
you clicked on it and you had to wait a good minute before the thing booted up. So I didn't know if that would make the talk go real smooth or not.
with the we had links to the different video sections, and I passed them on to Jesse as well. So, and he responded that he had received them and they were good quality. So I know that they could be seen on our website. So, okay.
Yeah, we could definitely post those up. So I'll go ahead and get that on my list.
Okay.
Yeah, I can probably make this presentation available to you too. Perhaps if you want to post that. That's after I check my spreadsheet and see what the difference between those numbers were on those two slides.
Great. Yeah, if you do that, we can share that along with everything, kind of maybe pull it together in a whole update blog post or something like that on our website.
Okay.
Other questions for Matt? Getting a few other questions here, Matt, in the chat. There's a question about reasons for brook trout decline in Spring Creek. Are there any ideas why the brook trout have declined?
Not really, just be speculation. There are some instances in some streams where they determined that brook and brown trout don't necessarily coexist too well together. That could be what's going on here. Although when you look at the 95 data in the veteran section, they've got quite a few more brook trout than brown trout or brook trout at that time than we've been getting now. So I can only speculate that would be the reason why. Although I will say that we seem to have been getting a few more brook trout in that upstream station over the last couple years than when we first started this in 2014.
And then there was another question from Dan about any discussion about improvements to the stream conditions of the 900 section, like structure and anything like that?
Not at this point. Right now, again, it's some of the money for habitat improvement isn't readily available at this point, but certainly if some habitat improvement money does become available, it's certainly an option.
Okay, and then Jesse had also an off-topic question here about any comments that you want to make about the proposed inland trout management plan and what to expect in our area.
With that, we had to change some areas in Oatka Creek to be, we originally thought they would qualify to be stack extended, where there would be several stackings throughout the year. But it turns out once we looked at some of the data associated with that and the criteria for stack extended, some of those sections will be just a one-time stacking in Oatka Creek. That's the one I know comes up. Everything else, see, I think around Aquatic Creek, the stackings are still going to be stacked extended, some of those areas. But I think the stack extended sections will, where they exist, I think anglers will appreciate those sections because that way they'll be stacked 5 times over the course of the season rather than once or twice as had been done in the past. So that'll help spread the trout out a bit and be available to anglers for a longer period of time. That's probably one of the big things. That plan had, it was a long time in making, and well, trout anglers in general and Trout Unlimited members specifically were a very important part of the development of that plan right off the bat. So, and I know Jesse sat in on a lot of those committee meetings for that, but I think it will be a good thing for trout fishing.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Don't be shy. There's only 60 other people on the call.
Yeah, how many were up? 54. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then some people on the Facebook Live. So, all right. Well, are there any closing remarks from you, Cal, or Jesse? Anything you guys want to say about our next session or anything else like that?
I think Jesse, if you could talk to the next month, that would be great. I just want to thank Matt again for coming on tonight and sharing the survey results. Appreciate it, Matt, and thank everyone for joining. Also appreciate you guys participating in the chapter activities. So,
okay, well, I might just I'll close out. I'll mute myself and close out my video, but I'll probably hang out for a while just to see what the rest of the meeting has to say.
You are the star. There's not going to be a lot more here.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. And hopefully we'll get together sometime this summer in a socially acceptable way, wear our masks and stuff, and maybe we'll see you out in the field.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks.
Jesse, you got your speaker on?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Matt, Chris. I really appreciate you setting us up here with the Zoom. And Cal, thank you for doing all the summary stuff for the project and the initial electroshocking stuff. So next month we have Tim Flagler. He will be tying, I think we've talked him into 3 flies, and folks will be able to tie right along with him. So that will be a pretty cool event. So I think we're going to be sending out an email here in the next probably couple of weeks. We'll do our February e-news and we'll get that out to everybody. So thanks a lot, everyone. Chris, you got anything else to say?
No, that's it. I think this went well, and hopefully it was everyone could hear and everything okay and get their questions out. So I think it worked pretty good.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great night.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.